Hello, everyone. Chief Meteorologist Keith Thompson here, News Channel 3, and I am interviewing Nick Stewart, meteorologist at Iowa News Now. This, by the way, in our Community Conversation podcast. Nick is the meteorologist at the CBS television affiliate in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's a sister station to us here in News Channel 3. And the reason we're talking is because 6 months ago, a powerful cluster of thunderstorms known as the derecho roared across Iowa, and it ended up being the most destructive thunderstorm in United States history. And I think the oddest part about it is that Nick says they're still cleaning up in Cedar Rapids. So Nick, first of all, what do you remember from that day? You know, I talked to you shortly after, and it was pretty traumatic. You were even out of your residence. Mm-hmm. And so what do you remember looking back 6 months?
It is really kind of bizarre just seeing how much things are different, not only in my life, but in the city of Cedar Rapids and everything. And just our better understanding on exactly the evolution of the storm that day too. When we first talked, we were still in a what just happened kind of mode. There so much happened so fast. And we were just out of the gate, covering the storm, covering the damage, and then, of course, working on our own lives as well. So just in the immediate aftermath, I think what's still so strong with me is just how cut off from the world Cedar Rapids was. We didn't have power. Many people didn't have power for upwards of 14 days inside the city of Cedar Rapids. Cell phone communication was very limited for upwards of 5 days after the fact. I lost my home, of course, in the derecho. I now have a new home, but then once I got that new home, it still took 2 months to get internet working in the home because the infrastructure there was not only so devastated, but also the workload for the people that were just trying to do installs was so backed up. I think the biggest takeaway was just how seemingly slow the recovery was in the process. And it wasn't that we weren't doing anything. I mean, we had the National Guard here doing so much work. We had so many power companies coming in, tree companies coming in. We had so much help in Cedar Rapids, but the scale of it was just unbelievable. I mean, every square mile of the city of Cedar Rapids was a disaster area. And not only was it Cedar Rapids, it was Linn County. And it wasn't just Linn County. It was basically 13 of our 25 counties that were so heavily impacted by this storm. Just the slow recovery, was probably the biggest takeaway. And then just seeing how everybody came together. I mean, it's one thing to have to deal with this type of disaster in any year. But in a year that you're dealing with a pandemic, when you have people are supposed to not be close together, not supposed to really be gathering. But at that point, we didn't really have a choice. We spent, 6 months staying away from family and friends, but then we lost our home. What are we supposed to do? So, I mean, just suddenly all these rules of the pandemic just kind of went out the window, and we kind of had to do what we had to do because now this took precedence. I mean, there's so many different storylines from the derecho, and it's just recovering from it, I think, is still the biggest craziness to me.
Well, and I think that, you had said, I think when we talked, had been a few days, maybe even a week afterward. But like you said, it's sort of like maybe getting punched in a fight or something where you don't even realize how badly you're hurt until you're trying to recover. And I just think that's something that folks maybe don't even understand about even today, that the recovery is still underway.
Yeah, I mean, we still have tree companies that are, we hired in these big trucks that are still taking tree debris from people's yards. I still have tree debris in my new backyard that I haven't been able to get out yet. And now it's under, 1.5 feet of snow. So that's not coming out till spring. Even just little things like the street lights on my block are still out. Like there's literally just cables of power just hanging out because they haven't gotten to it yet.
Still today. There's still street lights. There's still lights that are out today.
Yep. All the traffic lights, like the red and green lights, like those are all back online, but the street lights, there's a lot of street lights that are still out because those are on, in terms of priority, on a much lower priority, and they're still working through things. I mean, every day I drive to lunch, I drive to dinner, you see utility crews doing something. I don't know exactly what. I think a lot of it is we're starting to get to the point where it is kind of the tidiness, just trying to finish up some things here and there. But yeah, I mean, there's still whole trees that are still down. I mean, there are parts in like parks along some of our major highways and rivers where you look out and there's just trees completely flattened still that they have to get to eventually. But because it's not blocking roads or sidewalks or anything, like they haven't needed to get to them yet.
Well, and on top of that, you've had snowy winter. I think I saw a stat that you tweeted maybe a week or two ago. I think at that time you were approaching your annual average, and that I think you've had some since then.
Yes. I mean, winter in the immediate short term after the derecho, we couldn't have gotten luckier with weather. It didn't rain for 20 days. We didn't have excessive heat and we didn't have excessive cold because it's August. But we got very, very lucky in the immediate aftermath of the derecho in terms of weather. For immediate response activities, we were golden. And then kind of came autumn, and it was a pretty wet autumn. And then came winter, and it hit us incredibly fast with snow. We had snow in, mid-October, late October, and we've been just accumulating ever since. And we didn't really have big snows until probably late December. And then once you hit late December, that's when recovery kind of became a lot slower because you really can't do a whole lot of work with trees and everything now that everything's coated in snow. So that has been definitely something that slowed us down recently. But I will say in the immediate aftermath, we actually were pretty lucky in terms of how the weather behaved.
Yeah, I think that, just one side snow note here. I don't want to go down the snow road too far, but I believe that right now you're sitting on about 3 times the snowfall that we've had. And we typically, of course, have a lot more than you. You would think that if you look at the latitude and stuff that, maybe we would be sort of in the ballpark, but we have been way short of snow. So now all of that debris that's still out there, like you said, it's under a ton of snow.
Yeah, I mean, so far this winter, I just up to this yesterday, I have to add 0.4 to it. So we're at 37.1 inches for snow so far this winter. And that is the 3rd snowiest to date. So through February 9th, that's the 3rd snowiest winter to date. Okay. And yeah, I mean, everywhere you look now, it's just piles. And of course, it's been so cold. We've had now sub-zero temperatures in morning lows for the last, I think, 6 days. And we've had single-digit highs now for 8 days. So that snow now is just rock solid. I mean, it's concrete. That's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, in addition to the infrastructure and the damage that was in the metropolis, let's say, or the metro area, there was also a heavy toll on agriculture. I was reading a little bit about that, not only with the numbers, but the timing. Mm-hmm. For example, for the corn crop, and of course in Iowa, to me, when you think of Iowa, you think of corn. I mean, there are other crops too, but I mean, that was the worst possible time for that kind of storm. It flattened the crop.
Yeah, and like the difference is if you had this type of storm in like June, that allows some time for the corn to kind of stand back up. But when you're that late in the season and you're coming off of what was already a pretty brutal year in parts of Iowa, you had really bad drought. And this corn crop hung on for so long. Farmers were doing such a good job of keeping that crop as good as it could be with the excessive drought we had in central and western Iowa. And then the drought came and just flattened it. And at that point of the season, it can't really recover at that point. And so, I mean, the timing, as you mentioned, it couldn't be worse. And of course, it's not just the crop itself, but as we're heading into harvest, we had so much storage destroyed. We had so much grain bin storage and all these different places you would put all this harvested crop. Now all that storage capacity has been destroyed for a large portion of the state as well. So, I mean, it really was just timing couldn't have been worse for farmers. And then not only was it the crop, is also the infrastructure, because if you have these really strong storms, you see flattened crop every once in a while. And that's obviously a problem. But when you get a storm of this magnitude, not only does it affect the crop, but it affects the farms, the actual, buildings needed to facilitate the harvest, the vehicles needed to facilitate the harvest. I mean, that was just bad. I mean, the agriculture is definitely one of the biggest impacts.
Well, and like you said too, I'm sure that is another one where the residual effects just keep coming and coming. I mean, bleeding over into farm loans and bleeding over into farm investment, for example. Farmers have to make their harvest in order to invest. Again, I want to remind everyone I'm speaking with Nick Stewart, meteorologist at Iowa News Now. That's a CBS TV affiliate in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It's a sister station to us here on News Channel 3. We're talking about the devastating, and that is not, it's a word that you hear a lot, but this is correct use of the term, devastating derecho that happened 6 months ago in Iowa. Cedar Rapids, really, I would say probably the hardest hit, correct? I mean, when we say Iowa, it's a big state. We're not talking about Western Iowa, maybe some central, but the eastern part of Iowa where you are took the hardest hit.
Yeah, there's no question that I think Cedar Rapids, when you look at not only, the weather observations that are available, but also the radar data, the satellite data, when you look at everything in terms of just the damage that occurred, it really points to the fact that this storm was strengthening and strengthening until it got to Cedar Rapids, where it maxed out in destructive power and then began to weaken. Here in Cedar Rapids was by far the most devastated area in the state of Iowa from this derecho. We had surveys that were done following the storm that had damage upwards of 158 miles per hour. That they weren't able to find that consistently in a larger area. Therefore, officially, it's 140 miles an hour for the highest speed, but there were indications upwards of 158. And so when you're talking about that wind, I mean, that's, we're talking equivalent to a hurricane. And a lot of people get really nitpicky of, you can't call it a hurricane because technically it's not a warm core system, doesn't have an eye, yada, yada.
Right.
But it really was the best comparison because not only was it the strong wind speeds, it was the duration. We had wind gusts upwards of 80 to 90 miles per hour for more than 45 minutes. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially an eye wall of a hurricane. I mean, you really can't get closer to a hurricane definition in Iowa than we did on that day.
Yeah, and I saw some of the video. I remember in particular one person who I think had like a Nest cam or some kind of cam that was in a living room window that looked out. I just remember seeing that, and it just went on and on and on. It truly was, again, another word that's used a lot, but this is legitimate use of nightmarish.
Yeah.
When you see that. Well, where is Cedar Rapids now? I mean, I know when I talked to you the last time, the call was sort of like, hey, nobody is paying attention to what happened here. And where is Cedar Rapids now? And where does this story not only fit in for Cedar Rapids, but for the rest of the country?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously making a lot of progress. I feel like life has definitely returned to like a normal-ish state for a lot of people. We still have several Facebook groups that are out there, like support pages. And there's a lot of people that are still fighting about insurance. 6 months later, there's still a lot of issues with insurance. I was very lucky. Progressive is who I went through at the time. They kind of just saw our apartment and was like, yeah, that's it is what it is. We were lucky, but so many people are still fighting with insurance claims. The amount of stories we've had with that is pretty substantial. I'd say a lot of businesses are kind of reopening after being shut down or destroyed. We have several that have opened just within the last month or so. We've been running a few stories on kind of the new progress and the new steps in the right direction. There's a lot of groups that are out there trying to replant a lot of trees. It's estimated Cedar Rapids alone lost 600,000 trees. And they're trying to obviously start the replanting process. Trees, obviously, for a number of reasons, are very important.
Right.
What you're probably going to see this upcoming summer is a lot of electric bills being higher because those trees offer a lot of shade to homes. That is now gone. I mean, a lot of homes are now in bright sunshine all day long.
Has there been any estimate? I don't want to put you on the spot here, but has there been any estimate on like a percentage of the tree canopy?
Yep. It's about 65 to 70% of
That's
the
crazy.
trees. I mean, you think about basically 2 out of every 3 trees was considered a loss, and they're still taking them down. I mean, there are still trees when you're driving around that just look very sickly and are hanging on for dear life. We're very lucky we haven't had any type of like major ice event yet. We've had a few close calls, but most of the events we've had in Cedar Rapids have been primarily snow. I feel, and my biggest fear is we kind of head towards, those months, late February, early March, you kind of get more of these transitional type of weather events, winter weather events. If we get some type of ice event, I'm really concerned about what some of those damaged trees may end up doing.
Yeah,
But I
because
mean, there's still a lot of tree damage that's still out there.
you don't know sometimes which ones are actually weak until
Mhm.
you have like some ice on them or something like that, and
Yep.
then they come down. I think everybody can relate to the idea of losing 2 out of every 3 trees in your community and what that would mean. I mean, and just like with the farming, just like with the infrastructure, it's a residual effect. It's something that it's like the gift that keeps giving.
Yeah.
In this case, it's not a good gift.
Yeah. I mean, we used to be really well known for our trees. We were kind of like awarded, it's like Tree City USA. Like that's one of the things that, I loved about Cedar Rapids is driving down those kind of historical streets and seeing these beautiful old homes and beautiful old trees. And now, I mean, it just looks, the whole city looks different. I mean, you compare pictures from a year ago to today. I mean, it's shockingly different. And I'm really not looking forward to, spring and summertime when the trees are fully, leafed,
Right.
what that's going to look like. I mean, that's probably going to be a complete shock of just how little tree coverage there is in Cedar Rapids now. I mean, it really is just unbelievable. And of course, the other problem we had is where do you put it all?
Right.
We had in Cedar Rapids a flood of '08. We basically demolished several neighborhoods that were along a river, made a permanent floodplain. And so we turned that floodplain into now storage of mulch because we've just been running these trees, but we still don't really exactly know what to do with it all. There's just so much tree debris in Cedar Rapids.
Well, Nick, I appreciate very much you spending some time giving us an update on that 6-month anniversary. And also, I think as a reminder to everybody who's outside of the Cedar Rapids environs that this story continues
Yep.
for the folks in Cedar Rapids. And our thoughts are with you guys. I'm glad to hear that everything is coming back. And hopefully once the thaw happens, that can continue so that people don't have those huge areas of trees in their yard. I appreciate you spending some time here. And hey, we'll when we're looking at the summer, of course, we'll be looking at storm season. So hopefully it'll be friendly as well. I think it gave you about 3 years worth of storms just in that one particular one there. I've been talking to Nick Stewart, meteorologist at Iowa News Now, the CBS TV affiliate in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Nick, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And thanks for helping us get the story out to as many people as we possibly can.
Of course.